Bill Camp, you co-starred in the HBO limited series The Night Of as Dennis Box, who is a New York City detective investigating a murder. Now, the show went through quite a process just to get it on the air, including, of course, the sudden death of James Gandolfini, who was producing and starring in it at the time. Where and when did the process start for you?
I was down in New Orleans, and I had done a workshop of a script that Steve Zalian had written. I'm going to say I just finished Death of a Salesman, so I think this was 2013. And so I had worked very briefly but very intensely with Steve, and I got a call while I was or an email from Scott Rudin while I was down in New Orleans doing 12 Years a Slave, to go to Los Angeles and read some of the scenes, some of the Dennis Box scenes, and read with Jim, and that's how it started. That's how it began.
Now, of course, it was a shock when Gandolfini passed away, and it must have been especially for everyone working on the night of. How much had you had a chance to work with him up to that point? I mean, he wasn't just co-star. Of course, he was the executive producer, so he had a big hand in it.
So I had never met Jim before until that trip to Los Angeles, which was all of 48 hours, and he and I spent maybe an hour and a half with Steve, actually taping some scenes and talking and working, and that was the extent of what I got to do with Jim. Unfortunately, Dennis Box and John Stone have no truck with each other in the very first episode. They speak of each other, but they don't actually have any dialogue. And we shot that first episode, that first pilot, and so I never saw Jim while we were doing that episode, and that was it. So the privilege I had of working with Jim was in a kind of working atmosphere, rehearsal and talking, and which was great. But I missed out on being able to act with him on camera.
The role of John Stone was in flux for a little while after Gandolfini's passing, but it ultimately went to John Turturro. What was it like working with him when he took on the role and the series was finally able to get underway and finish filming all episodes?
I had some experience with John because John was starring in a play that I did out at Yale Rep right after I got out of school at Juilliard. And so that I got to spend 3.5 months with John when I was quite young. And so there was a great ease and a kind of a real comfortable, a level of comfort with John, because he's John goes all the way. He crosses all of the genres in terms of acting, and he's a master at all of them. And so and the different kind of hats one wears in the business. He's a director, and he's a producer, and he's an actor, and he's a writer, and he's I'm sure he could be a DP. And so it was great fun. It was great joy for me to be able to work with John, because there's a real trust there and a sense of play, and again, an ease and an experience that we'd already had. And we had, in the 25 years between that experience at Yale and this one, John and I had seen each other and run into each other and also seen each other's work. So there was a kind of trust that was really important and made it a great joy. And of course, John is brilliant as John Stone, and one could never compare John and Gandolfini, because when we end up comparing about things, we sort of get nowhere. And I think John created a character that obviously contributed to the great success of that series.
Crime dramas and legal dramas like The Night Of tend to be adversarial, but in this case we're able to identify with everyone involved, including Nas, the suspect, and of course Detective Box, who's investigating and for a great deal of the miniseries is trying to put him away. So the characters aren't presented as simply, here's who we're rooting for and here's who we're rooting against, good guys or bad guys. It's more about gray areas. What did you think about how the show balanced our sympathies like that?
I think tremendously successfully. I think that was just from my experience of reading the script early on, and the way that Steve was shooting it, and the tone of the entire thing, and of course Richard wrote and Steve wrote, and where he was very subtly moving us towards as actors, and how he wanted this story to be told. I think there was tremendously successful in making that reality not black and white and not clear cut, and that it's not always good guys and bad guys, and that he saw the entire landscape. The two of them were able to create the landscape of what that criminal justice system is like, and its faults, and what happens to each and every person that is part of that entire structure or mosaic of, or if you will, of what that means, being in the criminal justice system, either as an offender, or as on the justice side, on the lawyer side, or on the policing side, or within the penal system, the familial, what goes on with the families. I think it was successful in touching on that entire landscape, and how it affects everybody. And I don't see how you could find any lacking anywhere there. So I think that's what made it really special, that show, is that it addressed all of those things, and I think really accurately, and in a really focused, clear way.
With the character of Detective Box in particular, there's a lot that goes, unspoken, whether he's, sizing up Nas or, investigating a crime scene. How did you go about trying to, convey the thought process of a character who is a little bit more taciturn, like Detective Box sometimes is?
There's a great description of that guy as a subtle beast, and so that was always something as a handle or a touchstone that I could always have with me. When he was moving through a scene with somebody, or was trying to piece together what may have happened that evening. And mind you, there's also he had a huge caseload. So there wasn't just that one case that he was working on, and we kind of get a taste of that at one point, where he's looking at a young woman who's been murdered, and he makes a comment about where's the press now, and where are all the cameras and press conferences and reporters. So I think also somebody who's spent their life, or at least a good portion of their adult life, living in the world of homicide, and being driven by the need to solve a solution, to come to the solution of this, horrible, problem, which is who committed this heinous, if not the worst thing that we can do to each other, human beings. And I think he's really driven by that. So it was a very serious business for him. And and there was always there was always in this particular case something gnawing at him that didn't seem right. So that was always there. So that was always in my mind, even when double checking or triple checking something and thinking, well, this mountain of evidence is very clearly against this guy, causes him to go back again and take it upon himself to do even extra footwork. So I guess the sort of the the seriousness of the job, and that people's lives were in the balance, and that he was also trying to find the the culprit for having taken somebody else's life. And so I think that you always had to not be too far this way, too far that way. And, that was why I think he was not caught up in the politics of the police department, caught up in the politics of the precinct. He was a loner, because that was his motor, that was his engine, was to solve these crimes. That he took it very seriously.
The night of, in terms of solving the crime, it has kind of an open ending where Nas is acquitted, and there's new evidence pointing to another suspect, though it's not entirely certain that Nas is innocent and that this other suspect is guilty, although it's starting to look like that when the show is wrapping up. What did you think about how that story ended?
Well, I thought it was great. I thought it was, I think, like as you were talking about earlier, with the way that normally we see crime dramas and the way things are structured and played out, the formula of how that story is told and the kind of architecture that they build these stories onto. And I think the idea that there is, that regardless of the fact that we may not know who actually committed this crime, somebody's life has been changed, irreversibly now. And it's affected a lot of other people. And we always want to have somebody to condemn and to blame. And we want to have that, answer, so we can sort of, tie it up in a very neat ribbon and walk away from it and say, no, that's good. We're fulfilled in a way. But I think that the brilliance of the fact that, well, he's been acquitted, but maybe who knows? And then maybe it's this other guy who was her accountant / lover / and maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it was one of the two guys walking across, and it may be that. I loved that ending because it goes on. It just goes on. It goes on, and that this story it's a vast story, and that just because and also it's. I think also we want to have somebody to blame. And the fact that we seem so sure in our criminal justice system, or feel the need sometimes to stampede towards a conviction, stampede towards putting somebody away in order for us to say, yeah, that's the person who did it. And it's not the person who did it, but because we have this desire in order to complete that story for, closure or satisfaction or what have you, that we can put the scarlet S on somebody. That, as we know, it happens all the time that people are wrongly convicted. So I like the idea that it's up in the air, it's ambiguous. We're still wondering, we're questioning, that we're not sure about this, but we so like to be sure, and so like, especially in our stories that we watch and see. So I loved it.
Since the season does have kind of an open ending, there's been a lot of talk, about whether there could or should be a second season or what form that would take. Would that be something you would be interested in if the opportunity came to either play Detective Box again, or maybe in more of an anthology style to team up with this cast and crew again for maybe a different storyline?
Yes, 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 yes. so that's a no-brainer, Daniel. Of course, absolutely. Whether it was Dennis Box, which would be a great gift, and I would find it, a privilege again to play, because that's a guy who to me is still somewhat of a mystery. There are things I know about him, but there are also things I'd love to discover about him that would happen if we had another story to look at that he would be a part of. So absolutely. I mean, as an actor, it's a great gift to have that sort of guy to play, uh, at least to me, and to work with John and work with that production team, and something that Richard and Stephen had written, and Jeannie, and even if Riz was back in some form, of course. If we That's a great idea, actually, to take the cast and mix it up into a different story and have us play different characters. But yeah, absolutely, it would be something that I would embrace. But I have no idea what's going to happen. I can't tell you because I don't know anything. I don't know. You may know more than I about what's going on. So I don't know. I can only hope.
Recently, in addition to The Night of, you had another memorable role in an HBO series, The Leftovers, where you appeared in a couple of like dream sequences, otherworldly sequences in season two. That's such an unorthodox show to begin with, and those episodes that you were in even more so. How did you wrap your head around that character and that storyline when it was first presented to you?
Well, it's interesting because I come back in season three, um, and I may have just committed a crime by saying that. I don't know. Uh, um, and a little more is revealed, and was revealed to me. I mean, Damon is such an incredibly brilliant writer. I mean, it's really incredible. Uh, but because I got to work with Justin and and uh, and Craig Zobel on the first one, who I had done compliance with. And I've known Justin for many, 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 many years from New York days, way back. Again, it was like I played the scene, and I think none of us really had a sure idea as to where we were or what exactly was going on and where it fit. And we sort of they had a better idea than I, but they were still, like, well, maybe we could go this way, or could go that way. And we even actually shot something that was an extension of an idea that I had um, on the bridge sequence, but it didn't end up staying. Um, but it was really, really fun. And also, that guy, clearly there's something, what is he? Is he the devil, or is he God, or is he, some angel, or is he a figment of, you know, Kevin's imagination? Or it was a blast. I mean, it was really fantastic. The only thing was I had to sing karaoke. I had to sing a George Strait song in, one of those episodes, and I don't think that made it. I think Mimi was a little like, ooh, it's like it's not supposed to be good, but not supposed to be that bad. So, so, but otherwise, that was a super blast, and again, it was a real privilege to work with all those people, and then subsequently later last year.
And you've done a lot of other work in TV and in film, but you're also known for your theater work. Is there any one medium in particular that you feel most at home as an actor?
Um, it's a great question, and it's not an easy question to answer because it's hard to say that there's one that I prefer than another or feel more comfortable in, because right now I feel very comfortable working in front of cameras and working on that scale, um, and uh, and yet, when I'm on stage, last summer I was on stage for a long time. um, I also love that, and they're very similar, but they're very different. There's a certain level of um, I, I don't want to say it's an ecstatic thing, but there's a certain level of achieving the conveyance of an idea or what happens in the moment with another actor in terms of dialogue in a scene, where uh, it shines momentarily. It sort of glows there, and then we're all sort of gliding along, and then that doesn't last very long, and then it moves into some, and then we're all back down on the ground again. But in both of those forms, as an actor, I've experienced that. And so ultimately, if the story is being told, then that kind of happens. And if I'm able to have that experience, then I know I'm telling the story correctly. And that ultimately is the deal, is that the story get told well, because I'm serving a story. Um, but I'm fortunate enough to feel and grateful that I feel comfortable in both of them now, and so I get a kick out of both of them. It's one is takes a lot of time some days to shoot very little part of a story. It's like putting a mosaic together, and then when you do it, you have, like, I think I heard somebody say once, it's like 20. You have to improv a scene. You get a shot like 3 or 4 times maybe to improv a scene, and sometimes just a portion of a scene. And then when you go on stage, you have to keep something alive and up for 2, sometimes 3 hours. But that's just part of the job. It's all, for both. There are challenges for both of them, but I think now I'm at a place where I feel very comfortable in both forms, and so I'm really grateful about that.
Now, last year, you were appearing in The Crucible on Broadway, and you were actually nominated for a Tony Award for your performance. Having worked in the theater for as long as you've been going back doing that, what did it mean to be nominated for a Tony?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was really great. Um, I was very surprised, but it meant an awful lot to me. I really, just by virtue of being nominated, I had sort of won the lottery. That's how I felt. It was like you said, it's something I've been doing since '89, which is a really long time, with a small break. But I was it made me think a lot about all of and made me uh, appreciate on a different level, I think, that that all of that was really because of um, all the brilliant people that I've learned from and that I've worked with, so it was, yeah, it was a recognition of what I was able to do in the production of The Crucible, um, and working with that fabulous cast and telling that great story. But I was able to tell it through Hale in the way that I did, I think, because I had learned so much from so many other people in the past leading up to that point. So I was really just a product of what I learned. And, I was grateful that I was able to be teachable, and that over all that time, I worked with some really incredible people, not just in New York, but all over the country in regional theaters, and in college, I thought a lot about my art professor in college, who was the one I was working with in 1983 up there doing stuff, who said, took me to New York to see some theater that I had no idea even existed or was even possible, and blew my mind. And so that she was the one who encouraged me to even go to New York in 85. So it meant an awful lot to me, it was great. And it's a great show to go to. I highly recommend it. I bet you've been, right?
I haven't been to the show itself, but I've been to the press room across the street.
Okay. Right. Well, I may never see you there at the press room across the street, but someday you should go to that show, because it was, it was an incredible show, and it was crazy, right? Because there had been an event that day. Remember? In Orlando.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So it was an electric day and night, and James was fabulous, and the whole thing was really, and it was the year that Hamilton won, so I got to be there that year, and see all of those. I mean, across the board, and all of that talent. It's like, oh my gosh, it's that's so far beyond whatever I could dream of doing. It's just, I'm in awe. And so my wife and I, Elizabeth, got to spend the evening,
Yeah, and I imagine that, given the popularity of Hamilton, getting to see that live, it's probably easier to get a Tony nomination to see Hamilton live.
Yeah, my wife, it was her third time. It was Elizabeth's third time seeing it. She had gone with our son Silas down to the Public early to see it when it was down at the Public. So she was lucky to have seen it with him there. And then they saw it on Broadway, and then they brought me, and then I got to see the Tony show. But yeah, you're probably right.
Well, I want to congratulate you again on the night of, on The Leftovers, and last year's Tony nomination, and fingers crossed for future Tony nominations, and if and when you're back on Broadway next. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a real pleasure. Thanks.